Much has been said. Some things which I wanted to say have also been said. And since the Secretary, DFS, Mr. Nagaraju, has kept himself so brief, I'm not sure I have the luxury of the audience indulgence. So I'll try to keep brief, but there's so much to say. That the three old banks of the presidency were amalgamated to establish the Imperial Bank. And many of you all who read about India's banking history, about how the central bank was formed and so on, would have also read in several publications that if John Maynard Keynes were to have his plan go through, and I credit this particular source to the Mint newspaper, which had written a piece some time ago, years ago, as to how SBI would have been the Central Bank of India if only John Maynard Keynes's plans had worked through. But no, the plans were slightly altered. So the Imperial Bank was formed with the three banks of the presidency, Kolkata, then Calcutta, Madras, and Bombay. And this building, not this, the building which we are commemorating, the first occupant of the bank of that building was, of course, Bank of Bombay. But after the 1920 Act and 21, when Imperial Bank was formed, this building was occupied by the Imperial Bank. For a minute, let's stay in 1920. I just want to take us through a few realities of then. And this particular building, about which many expressions have been used, I strongly believe it was a standing witness to so much that India's banking sector saw through. But just to put the context, the presidency banks put together, three of them put together, had 60 branches in India at that time, 1920. And exchange banks, as they were called, banks whose presence were in India, but whose headquarters were outside, had about 45 branches all over India. And some joint stock banks, joint stock companies, which were banks, with the banks themselves and their branches, were a total of 150 branches. So nothing more than 250 branches all over the country in 1920s, and largely present in 150 cities of the country. And the 150 cities were those which had more than 10,000 population. So that was the spread of banking at that time. And the Imperial Bank of India Act, as I said a minute ago, was passed in 1920. I want to mention this because I refer to the article which appeared in the Mint newspaper and say that there was a phase when today's State Bank of India did have, after the 1920 Imperial Bank Act was passed in the Indian Legislative Council, did a full commercial bank's function. It carried out all the functions of a commercial bank, but had two specific functions which were normally exclusively the domain of the central bank, which is the Reserve Bank subsequently, but any central bank of any country. It was the banker to the government during that phase and banker to the banks, somewhat, if you want to use that expression. So between 1921 and 1934, when the Reserve Bank of India was formed with this exclusive act, between that phase, this building functioned as Imperial Bank, a commercial bank, and also functioned as a part central bank to India. So Based on the Hilton Young Commission report, we all know that 1935 RBI gets formed. So now that it is so well documented, the history of State Bank of India, and I appreciate that bank, SBI, particularly because it has given so much care and attention to documenting its history. It is a very important part of any institution. SBI is doing very well in that. So 1921 to 35, I'm sure the author before the current author would have recorded it, and I'm sure it is from there that all of us are deriving. Imperial Bank of India, short of being the Central Bank of India and a commercial bank altogether, functioned as full-fledged commercial bank and with some features of the central bank. It's only from 1955 it is called the State Bank of India. So I'm taking a few minutes of yours only for this reason, that I want to stand before that building, the heritage building, Gothic, Indo-Gothic in its architectural style. Apparently it is now classified as Grade 2A heritage building. That heritage building, which we'll probably see later in the day, has seen all this and remains solid and gives the confidence to the nation that this is the bank which had 250 branches then, and what are we talking about now? 22,500 branches. And before I go to telling you slightly more about what's the growth, I'm not going to take too much of time, but establishing the Imperial Bank tells us a little bit more about what actually was the driving force behind setting up the Imperial Bank, because two of the objectives which have been mentioned then, I thought were very interesting. I'd like to share it with you all. First of all, the three presidential banks themselves initiated this. The authors are here, and I'd like to be corrected if I'm wrong, but I did do a bit of a homework before coming here. I'm not coming to any ordinary place, coming to SBI, who's known for recording its every meeting. And so I took my bit of an effort to find out. The three Imperial Banks' arguments were, two of them only, which I'll draw your attention to. That extension, they initiated the amalgamation and forming a bank which would later be called as Imperial Bank. So the main arguments that they used were that extension of banking facilities in India was greatly needed, as it was useless to educate people, and I'm quoting, these are not my words. That extension, I'm repeating, that extension of banking facilities in India was greatly needed, as it was useless to educate people into willingness to follow civilized habits as regards keeping their money if there are not at hand banking facilities for them to do so. That's the first objective. So you could have kept money before the Imperial Bank. We as Indians have traded in Southeast Asian countries. We've gone up to Roman era. Coins have been found in India. Guilds have operated in India. We kept monies. We knew, call it hundi, call it any other way, we kept monies. But the Imperial banks thought if we had to educate the people to keep or be willing to keep the money in a civilized way, without the presence of banks, it will be so not good. Therefore, it was necessary to form Imperial Bank. And the second one, and which is where this 22,500 branches really strike out to me, the second objective with which they initiated the amalgamation is after the amalgamation or consolidation, proposed to open within 5 years, that is in 1920-21, within 5 years after the establishment, no less than 100 branches of the Imperial Bank. So in the next 5 years, that is between 21 and 26, they would have founded another 100 branches. Now, State Bank of India today, this particular branch which witnessed it all, or which was the bank indeed itself, has grown to becoming 22,500 branches, and I understand another 500 branches are going to be opened in this year, financial year 25. So 23,000 branches today, 65,000 ATMs, 85,000 banking correspondents, deposits are 24%, 22.4%, advances are 19%, 50 crore plus customers. %25 debit card spends, 22% mobile banking transactions, and 25% of UPI remitter bank transactions, and 29% ATMs in the country. So if this is what is growth, it should be a global record, particularly in repeatedly called a developing country in India, a country which is still emerging, a country with huge population, a country which is often taunted for income disparities. But this is the growth of the premier bank in India. And today it is also a bank which is the only bank from India in Fortune 500 listed Indian banks. Much is said about this particular branch, which is 100 years, which is great, particularly because we are normally accused of not valuing our inheritance and heritage assets that we have. But your State Bank of India has ensured that you're not only maintaining it, but also celebrating it. But I understand, and again, subject to correction, there are 43 such iconic heritage branches of the State Bank of India, and some of which are older than the Imperial Bank itself. And they're spread across the country. And therefore, not so much to speak about State Bank of India's performance, how many clients you've got, having mentioned all that, I think there is a huge responsibility on all of us to ensure that these banking branches that you have, which are brick and mortar, which are iconic heritage centers, and I wouldn't want to list out the 43, but at least 13, which stood out for me because of their sheer age. I want to mention that to you. The oldest in the list that I have, maybe again subject to correction, oldest if it is, Chennai 1843, Surat, Kochi, Varanasi, Pune and Patna, all 1862. Imagine, what's this history? Amazing. Number of more than 200-year-old buildings that you have, from which even today's customers are dealing with digital banking. Look at the blend of history and modernity. So, Surat, Kochi, Varanasi, Pune and Patna, all 1862. Lucknow and Agra, 1863. Bangalore and Hyderabad, 1864. Jabalpur, 1866. Amritsar, 1866 as well. Jalpaiguri, 1894. So I'm not going to read out the 43, but I'm sure care is taken, just as this building in Mumbai, which is 100-year-old, older branches are also given equal attention and care, and they are also celebrated like this in their respective areas. But State Bank of India, therefore, has an envious history of being a part of India's banking system, but not just being a part, but also treasuring, valuing, preserving, documenting All these because they speak for how India's banking sector has grown. I said I wouldn't be going into the SBI's function today. This particular program, we are here to celebrate the building, its contribution, its rich history. But I couldn't miss out on saying, when I said history and modernity, I couldn't just stop at it. The digital app which SBI brought out, I never know how to pronounce this. YONO, whatever it is, has 8 crore plus customers. 8 crore. And its internet banking customers, particularly the retail, now stands at 13.2 crores. Some countries do not even have population that size, but you're servicing that many people. And I understand your digital investments are kept robust such that it can handle around 20 crore UPI transactions per day. It's a history on its own. I think it's important, and I would have said, oh, please document all this, but I will be thrashed, I know, because it stands to testimony. You're documenting it, not just printing it, but you're also having audio books, and you're going to have podcasts coming out of it. And since the author is in front of me, one of them, it would have been far better for him to have addressed you all, because that brief minute he stood on the dais alongside us, he said a few things which were wonderful nuggets. I think some newspapers of this country, both in English and many other regional languages, should have a small column of, let's say, 800 words or 1,000 words per day for the next one whole week, with the author giving nuggets per each day by some kind of a classification which he can put through. How many, he was just saying, and I'm not adding or aggrandizing myself, he just said the number of finance ministers who've been associated with SBI's history-making events. He could classify it like that. And probably you'll have next 365 days worth of material that he can give you, but I would restrict it for this week and make the reader's interest provoked so that they can go and read these wonderful documents and books that you're publishing. I think this is kind of history no bank in the world would have. Maybe one small bank in some of the Western European countries who speak about we are the parents of modern banking history and so on. But here are you keeping modern banking history, but also looking at the evolution of India's banking. And in this, I'm tempted to add one line more. I was just telling to Mr. Sethi, looking at the pattern in which the books have come out, talking about the SBI's history, there seems to be a unit measure of 15 years for each one of them. Very quick calculation, my mind said, after this 1996, which is the last one which is coming out, if you were to publish something currently, it would be a 30-year phase. Then he said, maybe we'll see if we want to divide it into 15 years. But whatever be it, between 2014 and today, the role of SBI in taking banking to the ordinary citizens in the far-flung areas, be it through your digital public infrastructure or your digital banking services, or through the various government schemes which are aimed at reaching the common man, insurance, Jan Dhan Yojana, PM Suraksha Yojana, Jeevan Bima Yojana, or Pension Yojana, Atal Pension Yojana, or through the various other priority sector lending area of activities. SBI has reached vast swathes of this country and for a part, and for a country, with this kind of a population, you've touched, if not all, most of their lives in one way or the other, directly or indirectly. So I think between 14 and now, let's say 10 years, or wait for another 5 years, it would be a trajectory which you would never be able to compare yourself with. I compared with the 100 branches in 5 years in 1920 at the time of amalgamation to 22,500 now. Similarly, if you compare your 22,500 now, or one which was relevant to up to, say, 2014, and between 14 and today, exponential growth in reaching every citizen of this country. So, I'm honored to be a part of this history, a very enviable history for any banking institution anywhere in the world. You've done well for yourself and done well for the country. Many more 100 years for yourselves. Thank you.